I'm truly humbled, and I'm truly honored to be moderating this guest lecture by Paul Theroux. And I've been told that I have 3 minutes to make this introduction, so I'm going to make every moment count. So there are some authors that you've never met, but you feel like you know them, like they've been a part of your life forever, and that they've traveled with you. This is how I feel about our guest speaker. You could say that he really inspired me to become a traveler, and by extension, a travel writer. When I read the opening lines to The Great Railway Bazaar, how many of you have read that book? Fantastic, right? He said, "Ever since childhood, when I lived within earshot of the Boston and Maine, I have seldom heard a train go by and not wished I was on it." I fell in love with trains with that line, and I hopped on the train from Penang, my home, to Singapore the first chance I could. And then when I read the sentence on page 2 of the book, and it said, "I sought trains, I found passengers," he opened my mind to travel through people, through encounters. Not just to see, but to meet and to get to know people. So you don't need me to read out his biography, because the number of books he's written, the movies that's been made, the number of copies he's sold, because that's all on the internet, which I read in an interview is a place that Paul doesn't really visit before he visits a place. But the man, to me, can be found in his words, in his cutting wit. The line that says, whoa, the light just went off, okay. The man can be found in his words, in his cutting wit, the line from St. Jack, "He's so shifty, the light doesn't strike him." That was funny with the light going off just now, right? That was funny with the light. Did you know that I was going to say that? In his wisdom, travel is both a desire to flee and a desire to pursue. In his humanity and compassion, the greatest writing, he says, describes difficulty, hardship, crisis, awkwardness, oppression, despair. In his enduring motto, his mantra for now, which is all genuine knowledge originates in direct experience. That was an email that he wrote to me before the session. In his irony and pathos, the man of 50 has the most to say, but no one will listen. That was in St. Jack. Well, Paul Theroux is now 73. I read that in an interview, in an article. He's now 73. And I'm sure he has a lot to say today, and I know all of us will be listening intently tonight. So Paul will be sharing with us his journey for 45 minutes, and after that, we will open up to question and answer. Please give a big hand of applause to Paul Theroux.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sihu. She quoted, I said, all genuine knowledge originates in direct experience. She quoted me as saying that. Who said that, do you know? Does that sound like a familiar quotation to anyone? A very big man said that. Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong said that you really don't understand anything, and you don't understand the world unless you have direct experience of it, that you need to get up. The Cultural Revolution was based on that. Go into the countryside, you want to find out how farmers live, grow rice. I mean, I'm not advocating the Cultural Revolution, but I'm just saying that Jesus didn't say that, Mao said it. And it's called, the essay is called On Practice, On Practice. So I'm very pleased to be here. I used to live here, as you probably know. I was a teacher at the University of Singapore, and I'm delighted to be at the Singapore at this Writers' Festival, because writing, reading are the most civilized things that you can do. And in this connection, we had an election in the United States last Tuesday, and about, excuse me, two men were vying for a congressional seat in New York City, and one called Mr. Grimm and Mr. O'Neill, I think. Doesn't matter what their names are, but they were in a debate, and they were asked, get to know the potential congressman. How many children do you have, and where do you live, and what's your favorite recreation? And then there was the question, what's the last book you read? Each man was asked, what's the last book you read? What do you suppose the answer was? They couldn't remember. They couldn't remember. In other words, they hadn't read one. Here's two guys who are going to be in the Congress of the United States, and they asked the last book. No, you could answer that question. Any intelligent person should be. It's not only they couldn't remember the name of a book, and they're going into politics. So that's one got elected. But the idea that if you can, there are many illiterate people in the world, and maybe they'll learn to read, maybe not. But the idea that you can read and you don't read a book is a disgrace. It's an absolute disgrace. It's shameful. And anyway, there you are. I don't want to make a meal of that, but I'm delighted to come back to Singapore. I first came here in 1968, in November 1968. So this is a significant. Here it is, November. I came on November 4th, 1968, and this is a city transformed, as you know. Was anyone here in '68? And raise your hand if you were here in 1968. I see about 10 hands. You were there in 1968. You were in Singapore. Okay, good. So you know that it's been transformed. In 1968, the Singapore that existed then was a Singapore that had existed since the turn of the century, really. I mean, that if Joseph Conrad came with me in 1968, he would have been able to find, he would have recognized Joseph Conrad. He was here in the 1890s and wrote about it. He wrote about Singapore in various stories. One is a story called The End of the Tether. Has anyone read that? The End of the Tether. There's Captain Whaley in The End of the Tether. And Conrad describes Captain Whaley walking through Singapore. And there's, from the harbor to the seaman's home and to the Maidan, the cricket club. And the Singapore that he describes still existed in 1968. It had Singapore had rubber estates on it into the 1950s, I believe. And there were, even when I lived here, going to Jurong was a trip into the countryside, into the jungle, really. It was wild, untamed. There were empty beaches. And even coming late at night, around Dhoby Ghaut, Bras Basah Road, certain roads, there were no people. There was no car, maybe one or two cars going by, but no people. Just empty streets, not something that would happen now. I'm not reminiscing. What I'm describing is a transformation. So Singapore has been transformed, completely transformed from what it was. It's certain areas are recognizable, others not. And this is a really useful thing for a traveler. One of the most enlightening things about travel is to go back to a place. Some of you may not be from Singapore. You might be from a place in England or Australia or Germany or the United States, and you have a hometown. Going back to your hometown is always instructive. The hometown might be much bigger, or it might be smaller, or it might not exist anymore. Many towns are not on the map. you begin as a traveler to understand what the world will look like when you see a place transformed. I think Singapore has been more profoundly changed, more profoundly physically transformed than any city that I can think of. Certainly than any city that I've been in. People say, well, Shanghai, and maybe that's so. I've been back to some places in China, and there's a certain level of transformation, but nowhere to the level of Singapore. And that's a very interesting thing, because when I first came to Singapore, I was 27 years old. I was just a young guy, and I was looking for a role, I suppose, to play in life. I was wondering what my life would be. I had spent the previous 6 years in Africa. So I had a little family. One of my children was born in Africa. Another was born in Gleneagles. My son Louis was born in Gleneagles Hospital. So I have a very close connection to. If you have a child born in a place, you have a very fond feeling of it. But I was trying to find out what it was, what was in store for me. I knew that I wanted to be a writer, but I wasn't quite sure how to go about it. I had published some books, but just to publish a book or write a book isn't enough. I didn't really know at that point what my subject was. And you know that Sigmund Freud says that our childhood experiences form us for life. But another psychologist, academic, and not a close student of Freud, but a post-Freudian, is called Erik Erikson. Have you ever heard of Erik Erikson? Maybe not. But you've known the word, he had an identity crisis. You say someone had an identity crisis. Do you recognize that? Identity crisis? Well, Erik Erikson came up with the expression identity crisis. He also said, very interestingly, Erikson, that different phases of your life form you. It's not just childhood, but at every juncture of your life, there's a crisis of some kind. Not a horrible crisis, but there's some conflict or some developmental possibility. And those are the things that form us. Early in life, of course, it's childhood. But then there are these stages. He described the 8 stages: hope, will, purpose, competence, fidelity, love, care, wisdom. Take love, for example. In your mid-20s, you think about love. Will you be intimate with someone, or are you going to be alone? There's this crisis between isolation and intimacy. Are you going to find Mr. Right or Miss Right? Later on, it's care. There's a sense when you're at a certain age, might be in your 30s, you think, maybe I should be doing something. Maybe I should be generating something, writing something. What am I giving to the world, you might think? So it's called, you're going to stagnate, work, or are you going to build something, make something? And so on and so forth. And so the interesting thing that Erikson is different from Freud is that even in old age, at my age, I think, what am I doing? Am I giving anything to anyone? Do I have any kind of legacy? Have I helped the world? Have I done what I ought to be doing? Have I made my life count? Now, you probably came here expecting me to tell stories about travel. And I will tell you, I can tell you funny stories about travel. But what I'm trying to explain to you is why a person travels. Why would you leave home? And I know why I left home. I left home, there's another concept. It's a Jungian concept. It's called individuation. You didn't think you were going to get a lecture on psychology, did you? Anyway, individuation is very interesting because it's, in this theory, Jungian theory, is that you don't find anything about yourself unless you leave home. When you leave home, when you go away and you're on your own, you find out who you are and you find out things about yourself that you can't find out at home. When you're at home, people are asking you questions. They're saying, get a haircut, get a job, get your feet off the sofa, sit in the light, you're going to ruin your eyes, don't watch television so much, and so forth. But there's a psychic process that takes place when you travel. You develop when you travel. That's why people love to travel and they love to go places, because they find things out about themselves. I come from a family of 7 children. Now, do you think that you've got a choice when you come from a family of 7 children is big. It fills a house. I wanted to leave. This idea of a big, happy family wasn't something that possessed me. I thought, there's a big, happy family. I want to go away. I'd like to leave this big, happy family. I want to go away. I don't want people to ask me questions about what I want to do. I want to ask myself the questions. So as soon as I was able to go, I went. First, I went to university, away from home. And I think I was 17 then, and I think that's when I left home. Because once I left to study, I never really came back. So I studied. 4 years later, I came back, but I worked during the summer, and I was on my own. I was self-financing. And then I joined the Peace Corps. The early 60s was a crisis point for me, for the world, and for everyone. The Vietnam War had started. The atomic testing had started in earnest, so that was an issue. Should we test atomic bombs? So atomic testing, the Vietnam War, the civil rights movement started in 1963 in the States with various events, critical events, integration of schools, churches were bombed, civil rights workers in the South in the southern US who were registering voters were killed for getting people to register to vote. There were forcible integration took place, and some places there was a confrontation between soldiers and angry people. So that happened in Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, South Carolina. There was so integration. So all these crises, and the Cultural Revolution, which I mentioned earlier. That, you might say, oh, well, what does the Cultural Revolution have to do with events in America? Profoundly so. It was questioning authority. So Mao said, you need to question authority. Not him. He was in charge. Don't question me, but question your teachers. So, I mean, any person who was in China in that period will tell you it was a 10-year nightmare of rebellion. And sometimes just people breaking windows, destroying schools. But also, there was something similar, a kind of cultural upheaval in American universities at that time too. So the 60s was a very interesting time, and in Singapore, there were ripples from the Cultural Revolution here too. The Goldsmiths Union was a Maoist union, and so there were Maoist elements in Singapore who occasionally would have an uprising. They would have a demonstration, a pro-Mao demonstration, right here in the streets of Chinatown and in the various in sort of the crowded areas, not the countryside. But so there were Maoist demonstrations. Does anyone remember that? And there were elements of, say, Maoist cells at Nanyang. So Nanyang was the Chinese language university, and so this was a problem here because Vietnam, Maoism, angry students, having long hair, being untidy, that was also a problem in Singapore. So people, they were wondering about elements of people who seemed disloyal or who were trying to create trouble. Now, this was a very, very interesting thing because I suppose, in a word, you could say it was questioning authority. But there was a wave of rebellion, a wave of discontent that was worldwide. It was in the United States, it was in Europe, and it was in Asia. And it was focused here in various ways, among students and then in political elements and so forth. So I was part of that. When I came here, I had come from Africa, and I was still trying to figure out what was my role. And in each case, in Africa, it was decolonization. That was another thing that I noticed about travel. African countries were becoming independent. But you say, well, what does this have to do with becoming a travel writer? Everything, because I began to identify myself with the people who were trying to find an identity. I didn't know what my identity was. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to write, but I kept seeing people questioning authority figures, and upheaval. A spirit of individualism is very important if you want to be a writer. Because you're not working for someone, you're writing something for yourself. And I mean, that's essential to write what you want to write. No one hiring you to write something, but you want to do it yourself. So in order to do that, you're questioning authority. And the world is full of father figures. So in Africa, the father figure was the colonial power. It was objecting to being possessed, occupied, colonized. And so there was that. Here, Lee Kuan Yew was a father figure. He was a very important figure. It still is. I mean, he recently had a birthday. He's 91. God bless him. And he was the mentor and the authority figure and the father figure in Singapore. And so I was also responding to him and wondering what my role was vis-a-vis political figures. My boss was D.J. Enright. Does anyone know D.J. Enright? You know who he is? You've heard of him? Enright. Some of you have. Okay, he was head of the English department here. Now you might say, well, I joined the English department, I was in the English department, I was part of this structure. But actually, I didn't agree with a lot of things that he said. He was a really wonderful man, Enright, and the students loved him. And he was a very sympathetic, very charismatic man who wrote poetry, gave lectures, and he was a wonderful teacher. But I didn't agree with him on, he'd gone to Cambridge, I'd gone to university in the States, he was English educated. He had certain favorite authors that he favored. D.H. Lawrence was one. He loved D.H. Lawrence. He thought D.H. Lawrence was, he thought Lawrence was the visionary. I didn't. So anyway, I won't say I was uncomfortable, but I didn't agree with him. So we would, with his point of view on a lot of the subjects that we taught. American literature was not taught, but I was raised studying Shakespeare, also studying Mark Twain or Emerson, Thoreau. I thought that we should teach Henry David Thoreau. You know who I mean by Thoreau. He wrote Walden. Now, Walden is a really useful book. I thought it would be useful here because it seemed insular. Now, Singapore is an island, and when you live on an island, you have this impression that it's a vast place. Actually, it's not vast. The world is vast. But on your island, you can get the impression that your island is the world. What Thoreau did, which I recommend, was he left home, he built a cabin, and he lived in it for 2 years, and he wrote about being away. Being disconnected from your home, it's like individuation, going away from home, is a very helpful thing in finding out who you are and what you're meant to do. So I thought we should teach Thoreau. Enright said no, he wasn't interested in it. By the way, Thoreau was 28 years old when he did that. The rest of the time he lived at home. If you look at the life of Henry David Thoreau, you see he's a man who grew up in a house, went to Harvard, came home, lived with his parents, and only spent really 2 years away in the cabin writing Walden. Walden took him 6 or 7 years to write. So he's a very interesting case study in a guy that lives with his parents, and a cellar dweller, as they call it in the States. So I came here and I realized that there were a lot of authority figures in the world, and that the direction that we were going, it was clear to anyone that the Vietnam War was a big mistake. It was clear to anyone that the civil rights movement was a just movement. It was clear to anyone that experimenting that dropping atom bombs into the Pacific Ocean was a bad thing. It was clear to most people that the Cultural Revolution was a bad idea. But it was all happening. Today, there's a lot of bad ideas. There's plenty of them out there. And at the same time, you wonder, you have this feeling, politicians are making mistakes, but what's my role in this? Who am I? Where am I going? What am I doing? What am I meant to be writing or seeing? And I thought, I couldn't have put it into words at the time, but it seemed to me that what I needed to do, and I suppose the insight that I had in Singapore was that I needed to see things as they are. I felt that in Africa to a certain extent, but I was persuaded, the anti-colonial movement, it was very passionate, so I was caught up in it. But I needed to see that, I decided that my mission as a writer was to see things as they are, to describe things as they are, not as I wanted them to be, not as people told me that they were, but I needed to see things as they are. And that would make me free, and it would also, that telling the truth, writing about what I saw, would be enough of a mission in life. And it was out of that when I joined the University of Singapore, I developed a reputation in Africa as a troublemaker. Well, by troublemaker, I used to write for magazines, and when the university got wind of that, they really didn't like it. So I was forbidden. What part of my contract was I had to promise not to write or publish anything for the 3 years that I was on the English department. Well, okay. I mean, it's very hard to enforce writing. Publishing, well, who knows? You could they could regulate that, but I was told not to write anything because what I wrote seemed to be inflammatory. What I had written in Africa, but that didn't stop me from seeing things, and it didn't stop me from writing. I didn't publish what I write, but the first thing that what I wrote, I wrote a novel about Africa. I didn't publish it, but then I started to write about how I felt. I felt in Singapore then that I was underpaid. I felt sort of old. I felt very burdened. And then I felt also that that Singapore was about to change, but I didn't know how it was going to change. And so the decision that I made was to describe the Singapore that I knew and that I could see. So I began to write the novel St. Jack when I was here. That would have been probably midway through 1970, at the end of 1970. I left in November 1971. So, say for the last 8 months that I lived in Singapore, I described the streets, the names of the streets, the smell, the sights, the sounds, the sound of a funeral, for example, people blowing trumpets and the cymbals, people selling flowers, sailors going back and forth, Bugis Street, the university, the botanical gardens, and the empty streets at night. So and also the shop houses. I remember the first time they tore down shop houses. The first big building at that time, it was probably 1969 or 70, was the Hilton on Orchard Road, Singapore Hilton. That was the first big building. And I realized when they built it, they tore down rows of shop houses. And I realized soon there would be no shop houses. It was pretty clear that the shop houses were taking up valuable land. So in that book, now you can read the book or not, as the case may be, but that book was a deliberate attempt to write about Singapore as it was, as it was, as it looked, as it looked. So you could say, well, did I have a theme in mind? Did I have a moral in mind? Did I have a message in mind? No, I didn't. I didn't. I was writing about a man who's 50 years old. That seemed to be old at the time. And I thought, well, I'm going to write about this man, and I'm going to write about his relationship with women, with his friends, with drinking, with the place itself. He's a kind of misfit. And that was a big decision for me to describe things as they were, because we tend in fiction, a lot of people in fiction describe things as they wish they were or as they want them to be. And I didn't. And so soon after that, I left. I went to England, where my wife got a job, and I lived in England and finished St. Jack. Then I wrote another book and another book and another book. And then I decided to travel. I wrote my first travel book. I thought, I know what. I'll take a train. I'll leave London. I'll go to Paris. I'll go to Istanbul. I'll go to Tehran. I'll go to Afghanistan. I'll go to Pakistan. I'll go to India. Then I'll go to Burma. And then I'll go to Thailand. Then I'll go to Singapore, and then see what happens. So, but on a map, I could see I could do that. My wife said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I realized that I could get a train in Victoria Station in London, and I can get to Afghanistan. Just get on the train and go to Afghanistan. I could take a train to Afghanistan. You know, I don't have to drive. I don't have to fly. I won't get jet lag. I'll just get on this train. And I'll go to Afghanistan." And then I realized there's no trains in Afghanistan, but I took a bus through Afghanistan. And then, I actually went to Thomas Cook in London. I got a ticket from London to Turkey, to Ankara, Turkey. Then when I got to Ankara, so I took the Orient Express, then took another express. Then I got to the edge of Afghanistan, and they said there's no train, there's no bus. So I took a taxi from Meshed in Iran to Herat, now controlled by, God knows, a warlord, I guess. But at that time, it was just a funky town in the west of Afghanistan. Took a bus, went down the Khyber Pass, took another train, another train, another train. And I ended up back in Singapore. And I went to Burma, and then I flew to Bangkok. I went up and down, went to Laos, took the train, and arrived back in Singapore. And this was 1973. And my friends were still here. They said, "What did you do? How did you get here?" I said, "I took the train." So I remember sitting at does the Singapore Swimming Club still exist? Yeah, so I remember I was at the Singapore Swimming Club having a beer with my friends. I was a member at one time. And we were talking, they said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to go to Vietnam. I'm going to fly to Vietnam. I'm going to take a train in Vietnam," which I did. And then I went to Japan. I went home on the Trans-Siberian Express. So I kept to my mission, which was describe things as I see them, not as I wish they were, not criticizing them, but just reporting on what I saw. It liberated me, it gave me a subject, and sometimes it's shocking. To describe things that you actually see can be very shocking and upsetting for people. I was talking to Siu Hoon about my book about, I wrote a book about traveling around the Pacific. Very upsetting to a lot of people because I went to New Zealand, I went to Australia, I went to Solomon Islands, the Trobriand Islands, Fiji, the Marquesas, Easter Island, and each place I described what I saw. In Australia, I was interviewed by a number of people. It was like a semi-book tour, and every person who interviewed me and described me was someone that I chose to describe. So when they asked me questions, I asked them questions. So they were doing a piece for the newspaper, you know, the Australian, the Sydney Morning Herald, whatever, and I described them. And they didn't like it, actually, because, and same thing in New Zealand. no one interviewed me in the Solomon Islands or places like that, but they thought it was okay for them to describe me, but they didn't like, a journalist. I was describing, what the kind of shoes they had and their funny hat, and the kind of questions, that they'd ask me about Elvis Presley or, I don't know, all sorts of questions. So I put that in the book. Very shocking, and the book was seen to be very upsetting. But what I was doing was I was describing what I heard, what I saw, what they said, and that can be surprising to some people. It wasn't a form of rebellion, really, but it was an assertion of, I described father figures, authority figures, but it was a way of asserting what I was doing, who I was and what I was doing, and it was asserting my view of things. And I suppose it was my way of seeing things as they were as a form of disagreement, that instead of seeing the world the way the authority figures wanted me to see it, I was seeing it myself. And this is, in a way, it's a very liberating thing to see things the way you want to see them. I've recently been traveling in the southern United States, and it's very, very enlightening to travel in your own country as though it was a foreign country. So you find, we'll say Bill Clinton has something called the Clinton Global Initiative. He tries to create better conditions for people in India and Africa, clean water, childbirth, safety, malaria eradication, literacy. He comes from Arkansas. I was traveling in Arkansas. Well, there's a county in Arkansas called Lee County where 25% of the adults cannot read or write. Lee County, Arkansas. Lee County, Arkansas also has a very high rate of child hunger. And it has a very high rate of people who have no insurance and no access to medical care. So it's interesting to me. That's Arkansas. Clinton was governor of Arkansas for almost 12 years. He was president of the United States. And Arkansas is like a third world country. Not really third world, but it's certainly a country that's has many challenges. So I didn't know that till I went there. And I thought, well, I'm going to publish this next year, traveling around the South. It was very enlightening to travel in the South in a way that I had traveled elsewhere, go to Angola or Brazil or Kenya or India, or Singapore for that matter, and you're a stranger. I'm not a stranger in the United States. I speak the language, and so that was my mission. After 2 trips to Africa, I went from Cairo to Cape Town, then Cape Town to the Congo, to the top part of Angola. And I thought, I want to see my own country. And it's a way of, it's a mode of inquiry, I guess you could say travel is. Writing fiction, you sit at home and you ponder. It's like a form of prayer. You ponder what happens next. And it's very difficult, actually, writing fiction, because there's a lot of anxiety in it, a lot of suspense, and a lot of uncertainty. You're not quite sure where you're going or where the book will end. But with travel itself is a mode of inquiry. A traveler asks people questions, and they go about their business, and you begin to discover this world by physically going out and encountering it. So there's 2 ways of being a writer. One is stay at home and write poems or fiction. The other is you might travel. Or you could do both, which is what I've done. But what I wanted to describe to you in this little talk was how Singapore altered my perception of the world. It made me question authority, and it made me wonder who I was, what I was doing, and whether what I was doing mattered. And so when I came here, I would say an unformed individual. And it wasn't until I left, when I left Singapore, and I left a salary employment, that I discovered that I was out on my own, and all the lessons that I had learned, the experiences that I'd had here, not like the Freudian thing of childhood influences you, but the experiences that I'd had here, profound that they were, seeing Singapore about to change, but not knowing where it was going, formed my perception of the world, and it made me think, we have to see things as they are, cling to what they are, write about that. Don't write about how you want things to be. You know, people go to England and they look for Charles Dickens' England, or Henry James' England, or Jane Austen's Bath, or whatever. And they look for elements of the past. That's a kind of nostalgia. But seeing England as it is very, very interesting. Same with the States. But England more so, because England's been written about much more. London, for example. But Dickens' London doesn't exist. What exists in London is a much different place from the one that you read about in books, and much more interesting and complex. Singapore is the same. I feel about Singapore now that beneath all the big buildings, the glitter, the restaurants, the shops, there's so much merchandising here. But beneath that are people who remember what Singapore was. If someone said to me, what should I write about Singapore? I would say, talk to people over the age of 65 or 70 and ask them about their experiences. Did they grow up in a big family? Where did they live? What did they eat? Where did their parents work? What was the Japanese occupation like? What was the presence of the British? If talk to a very old person, they might remember something, or they'd heard stories. An oral history would be great. Maybe someone's done it, I don't know. But Singapore, in appearance, is one thing, but its heart is more complicated than that. And so Singapore and memory. So when I come here, I look for landmarks. The landmarks are disappearing, but I look for them to find my way around, and also to see, well, what remained? What has remained of the Singapore? And I would say that all writers do that. That's what I've done. You know, I've written about 50 books, and in all of them, what I've tried to do is describe the world that I see, people that I've met. I'm not interested in architecture. I'm not interested in, I go to museums, I go to churches, I go to events and so forth, but I don't write about them. I write about people, and I try to find out what people's stories are like. I got a hint of this when I first went to Africa. It was 1963. So I was in the African bush in 1963 and 64. I was there for 6 years altogether. Now, the old people in where I lived, there were people who were 65, 70. I mean, life expectancy in Africa is not long, but there were old people there. If I had been really smart, I would have talked to people. I did talk to them occasionally, but I never tape recorded them or anything like that. But there were people there who were born in the 19th century. There were people in Africa who remembered, who had never seen a white person, or they remembered the First World War. You know, the First World War was also fought in Kenya and Tanzania, Uganda, and in Mozambique. So there were people who remembered 1895. There were people who remembered the first colonialists. There were people who remembered the war. Amazing. Now it seems like ancient history. But it's part of my own personal history, is that I met these people. So one of the gifts of old age is that you have this link to the past. And those of you who think about writing, think about that writing is also about the world as it is and the world as it was. The older people are eyewitnesses to that age. And then, you know, Japanese occupation in Singapore was amazing. They saw, local people saw the British rounded up and put into Changi prison. That's quite a traumatic experience. If you've been colonized, by one group of people. Then you see the people who colonized rounded up and put it in, made into prisoners, and suddenly there's an occupying force of Japanese. I mean, that's pretty amazing, traumatic. But there are people in Singapore now who remember that. And so that to me, when people say, have you read Harry Potter? I say, well, no. Because I'm not interested in fantasy or that kind of magic or, you know, kiddie story. I understand that there's something to it. But I'm interested in the world as it is, the world as it was, what really happened, what forms people. And also, where are we going? You think, when you see development, you think, do places just keep developing and developing and developing and developing, and it's straight north and they just keep developing until they become a utopia? Or do things fall apart? I tend to think, if you've lived a certain length of time, you say, eventually, things fall apart. It's not straight north for development. It's not straight north. That, you know, man is an invasive species, so we tend to destroy our habitat. And that happens. Traveling in the south, in the southern USA, there are some roads in the south that were once main roads north to south. But then, and so they had restaurants, hotels, motels, petrol stations, highly developed roads, 2-lane highways. One is Highway 301. It goes through the Carolinas to Florida. It was the road that everyone took if they went to Florida. Now, if you go down that, it looks like doomsday. The restaurants are all closed, the motels are all closed, the petrol stations are closed. There's just a couple of little shops. It looks like Mad Max. It looks like the end of the world. What happened? What happened was a different road was built, Route 95. And it doesn't, so the main road that used to go north-south isn't used anymore. They put in an interstate highway, and this road is full of derelict towns and derelict shops. And same, when you see that, you think, oh, I see. There was this big success until 1960-something, 66 or 67. Then this whole road, you know, maybe 1,000 miles of it, fell apart. And the towns died. That's pretty interesting. You also realize, as a traveler, that money doesn't make a difference. I was traveling in Angola. Angola is an oil-producing country. They produce, in US dollars, about $80 billion gross a year in oil revenue, 80 billion. That's quite a lot of money, 80 billion. You would think, oh, they must have lots of school books, great roads, great hospitals. Well, it's not the case. Angola is a very poor country. They have oil, they have diamonds, they have gold mines, but the average person in Angola has nothing. So I wrote about this. I don't want to. I mean, you can read it. It's called "The Last Train to Zona Verde." So the revelation in travel is what I was after, and it began here when I was on the English department at the University of Singapore, living on just off Bukit Timah Road, and very happy with 2 little children, but wondering, what's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to Singapore? What will happen to my children? What will the world be like? All you do is wait another, in this case, 68, another 40 years. Was that 40 years, I guess? And now I see the answer to that question. That's why it's wonderful to be back here. Thank you very much.
I think it's wonderful to know from him that the profound impact that Singapore really had on you, you know, that it really formed you as a writer, as a human being, you know. So I was busy taking notes in the dark. And what was interesting was what you said about how you describe things as how you see them, right? So how would you describe Singapore today? I know you arrived yesterday and you had some time. How would you describe Singapore today?
What you see in Singapore is what you see as a city. Can you hear me okay? A city is all surfaces. It's surfaces. So what you see is It's the Emerald City. It's tall. It's beautiful. It's new. It's still rising. Even I was here 6 years ago, and it's changed since then in 6 years. Singapore was not a high-rise city when I first saw it. It was shop houses with the Hilton was up, and the Shangri-La Hotel was built in about 1970. That was it. So it was a city without a tall building.
So you also say that, like different.
But I just want to say. So I don't know. I don't know the answer. What is it? I just see a surface, but sometimes surfaces reveal the inner state of a place. So I don't know. You really don't understand a place through its architecture. You understand it through its people. So the more I arrived yesterday morning, I had to get my shoe fixed. I went to Orchard Tower. There's a shoe mender in the basement of Orchard Tower, Mr. Teo. His name is Terry Teo. And he's a very interesting man. He's highly intelligent. And while he was fixing my shoe, we were talking. We're talking about Singapore as it was. He's a man probably 60-ish years old, extremely nice. If you want a shoe fixed, go there, because not many people fix things anymore. They throw things away. But just to add to it, that you won't understand anywhere by being dazzled by its buildings. The only way that you will understand is by talking to the average person, or to a person, someone trying to raise a family, get a job, struggle, live, find love, find romance, and get on. I mean, that's the way you understand it. So but I met him, and I met another man at an antique shop. Also, the second man that I met lived on not Brassbasa Road, but he was one of 9 children, living in 2 rooms.
I said, as big as your family, bigger than your family.
Bigger than my family. But I said, where did you? He said, in those days, people had a lot of children. We slept in the hallway. 2 in the room. But he's a connoisseur of antiques now. But he grew up in Singapore with 9 children. That's unheard of now. No one has 9 children now in Singapore.
No, I think not.
He'd be arrested if you had 9 children. But anyway,
how many children do you have in total now?
How many children do I have? I have 2 children. So
okay.
But you say, what does Singapore look like? I talked to these 2. Well, say 3 or 4 people I spoke to yesterday, and I was talking about the present and the past with them. So that's how you find out. That's why a travel writer needs a lot of time to talk to people.
Yeah, and time is something that people don't have these days. They just go in and out of a place. We live in a world with so much distraction right now. So time is something that is really very hard to find in our life.
That's true. I think people have time, but they use it differently. People are focused more on what they're doing, looking at their phone or looking at television. But it depends. If someone's fixing your shoe, you can have a half-hour conversation with them. That's quite good.
So I'm curious. You talk about how different phases of your life form you, and so how do you feel like you've changed as a writer as you've gone through these different phases? Do you write differently now that you're older versus when you were writing St. Jack? Is there that has?
I don't think I write differently. Well, I would say that. Well, first, the thing about phases is I'm talking to you. Some of you are writers. Some of you are selling insurance. Some of you work in a bank. Some of you are teachers. Whatever. Don't think because you're 30, 40, 50, 60, or older that your life is not going to change. All through, you might be 50 years old. You will still change. You'll still be learning. You'll still be developing. That was why I was saying that it's not a Freudian thing of you're fixed in childhood. All of you, if you're open to suggestions, open to experience, you will change. Now, it has my right. So there's hope in that. And also you need to say, how am I using my life? What am I doing with my life? You don't have to become a writer, but there's many things that you can do to give yourself a perspective on who you are, what you're doing, or what you should be doing, perhaps. So don't despair. That means that there's a crisis for each of you, or an opportunity for all of you. My writing, you can examine it. You could look at something that I've written in the 60s or something that I wrote last year. I just published a book called Mr. Bones. It's a book of short stories. But I wrote short stories in the 60s. When I lived in Singapore, I wrote short stories, and I wrote a whole book of short stories about Malaysia, about a man. It's called The Consul's File. He lives in a town called Ayah Hitam. There is a town called Ayah Hitam. It's near Penang.
Yeah, it is in Penang.
It's in Penang. Yeah, Ayah Hitam. It means black water.
Yeah.
So, Ayah Hitam. I invented the name Ayah Hitam, then I realized
that it actually exists.
I invented something that actually exists. So, inventing the truth is also part of writing. But I'm a bad judge of how I've changed as a writer. But I'll tell you this, though, that to become a writer, or to do anything well, takes a long apprenticeship. Siu Hoon can tell you, you don't become a journalist overnight. You don't become a writer overnight. After a year or two, you start getting the hang of it. After 5 years, you're getting a hang of it. So someone asked me the other day, in Hawaii, I live in Hawaii, and they said, so do you work every day? I said, yeah. He said, every day? It was sort of saying, at your age, do you work every day? Well, that's how you get, that's how you improve. That's how you get good at something. You're not gonna be good at something just by doing it one day a week or doing it for a couple of hours a day. You really have to do it every day, maybe every weekday. If you do it every day for 50 years, you'll probably improve.
So other than writing, I mean, which is what's the one thing that you want to improve your skill? I know that in Hawaii you now have a farm. I call him a gentleman farmer now. Yeah. He's a gentleman farmer. You have a farm and you kept bees and.
Yeah, I was a beekeeper for a long time, and I have chickens and geese, ducks. I grow bamboo. I grow different varieties of exotic bamboo. Bamboo is the plant of the future. You can make textiles from bamboo. You can build houses. You can put floors. It's a building material. You can do everything.
I grew up in a bamboo hut, so I'm living in the house of the future.
There you go. Yes.
I mean, yes. In Asia, I was telling Paul about a resort now that's going to be built in Bintan, and it's going to be made completely of bamboo, and no kids allowed.
But the birth rate in Singapore is so low. That's not an issue. But anyway, isn't it low?
I think so. I think it's declining. Yeah, it's yes.
It's the birth rate is declining in.
They're having campaigns now to sort of have people fall in love and make babies.
It's good, but politics won't solve that problem. I mean,
what will solve that problem? What do you think?
I think you need space and time. Japan has a low birth rate. Germany has a low birth rate. Italy, France has a low birth rate. Russia has a low birth rate. It's people look in the future, and there's a reason for it, but it's not going to be solved by an edict, a law, or anything like that. You have to give people a reason to have children, I think, and the capacity to have them. It takes money, space, love, all those things, all those valuable things. But I can't solve that problem. It's not going to be solved.
It's not going to be solved this afternoon.
Not politically. No.
All right. We have time for questions as well. So if you have questions, just put up your hand, and we have people roving with the mic. So, is there a hand there? I think there's a hand there. Right. Do you want to go over there? So in the meantime, though, I mean, you came to Singapore to kind of find your role in life, right?
I came because I objected to the war in Vietnam, and I refused to join the American army. But I thought, I can't simply be negative. I wanted to be positive, and I wanted to do something useful. So I became a teacher in Africa, and then I came here. Then eventually I did go to Vietnam as a journalist, and I realized that was something valuable to see. But we didn't answer any people with questions. Somebody up there.
Okay, I'm firstly going to embarrass myself, so I'm going to take my glasses off so I can't see your faces. Okay, so basically, I love traveling as much as you do, and I usually go around, and when I come back, I write my memoirs and stuff like that. And I would definitely fall in love with a personality like yours. So my actual question to you is, how did your marriage survive the travels? I know it's a very personal question because everywhere I go, every time I go, my husband is like, "Are you going again?" And all my friends are like, "Are you loopy? You just left him last week as well." So my question to you is, how did your marriage survive all the travels?
You know, that's a very good question. That if you're away from home a lot, it puts a lot of pressure on a marriage. And as a matter of fact, my marriage did lasted 20 years, 20 plus years, but it didn't fail because I was away from home. My wife understood that I was traveling, and that was my job. If being away from home is a problem for a marriage, you know, what about fishermen? What about people pilots? What about soldiers? They're away for a year, 2 years. I mean, an American soldier might have 3 or 4 enlistment, 3 or 4 tours in Iraq or Afghanistan or somewhere. So that's not the issue. If a marriage should be able to sustain absences and travel and work and so forth. So mine didn't fail for that reason. My marriage failed for other reasons. But I remarried, and you know, I'm away from home now. So I'm not being flippant. It's a test of love, of fidelity, and of trust if you can be away from home. Sometimes people need to be. I mean, when I left, I told you, I come from a large family of 7 children. I didn't leave home because I didn't like them. I left home because I wanted to find out who I was. I told you there's this theory of, Jungian theory of individuation. I wanted to find, who am I? Why am I on earth? What am I going to do? What am I good at? How can I want to meet people? I don't want people just introducing me to the family friends. I want to go out and find out, who am I? It's not.
But you also said in the interview that I read, it was like travel is both a desire to flee as well as a desire to pursue.
Yes, that's true.
So it's two.
But also, I wanted to get away from. I mean, don't you have you come from? We're in Singapore now. Singapore is an island. How many people have never left Singapore? How many of you have never left Singapore? Okay.
I think we'd be insane if we didn't leave, you know.
No,
it's such a small place,
there's-
island fever.
There are some places where people never leave.
Yeah.
There are places that people never leave. And I know people in Hawaii who not only have never left Hawaii, but they've never left their island. I mean, I know people on Oahu, the island I live on, who have never been on the island of Kauai. Or they've never left the island. But in Singapore, I mean, that's a testament to your curiosity about the world and your capacity to get a perspective on it. You leave Singapore and you suddenly see, the plane takes off and you see, oh, there's Singapore. Oh my goodness, there's Malaysia, there's Indonesia. You realize that you're surrounded by other people, other places, other issues, other conflicts.
Right.
I mean, so it's a very helpful thing to leave. And when you leave, then you have a perspective on where you came from. And some people leave home and never go back. You might leave Singapore and think, meet someone, find another life, and you just keep going. So travel is flight and pursuit. You're fleeing and you're pursuing. And sometimes you never come back, or you come back a lot later. But in all travel, you're looking, I think that one of the secret desires of travel is to find out whether you're destined never to come back. Maybe you're destined to find another home, you know?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have another question? We have to rush through. I'm just going to go down as well.
Yeah, that's true. So many people leave their place, right? I didn't see their hands, but I think traveling is a big business. But most people leave and they go on a holiday. So would you see this as the same thing? Going abroad, doing holiday or traveling, is there a different intention? Where would you draw the line, Mr. Theroux?
Okay, this question is interesting because it's a very sharp distinction. There's travel and there's tourism. If you're going to go to Europe or Japan or Africa on a safari. As a tourist, you're away, you have a time constraint. You have a week or 10 days or 2 weeks. You're a tourist. And you know where you're going. And you know what you want to see. A traveler has no idea, a true traveler does not know where he or she is going. And they know where they've been, but they don't know where they're going. A tourist has a very, very good idea of what they want to see and when they're coming home. The traveler doesn't have a very clear notion of that. There's the comfort factor. A lot of travel is about having a very bad time. A lot of tourism is about having a very good time. So what do you find out? What's the test of personality? Bad time or a good time? Generally speaking, a hardship tells you a lot about yourself, doesn't it? And I'm not talking about a nuisance or a delay. We all get delayed. One of the problems with some travel books is they write about illnesses, delays, and nuisances. In my books, I never describe illnesses that I've had, bad stomach, headache, a cold, or anything like that, because we all have them. Why do you care about, I mean, why would I write about something that you've had yourself? Or a long delay at the embassy to get a visa. You know, everyone has that problem. I applied for an Indian visa, by the way, about a year ago. Big delay, but I paid extra to get the visa. And I called up and I said, look, I paid extra fast-track visa. And it's now 3 weeks. That's the fast track? They said, oh, sir, let me check. So they checked. Oh, yes, they said, here's the problem. You wrote down writer. I said, why is that a problem? They said, if you write down that you're a writer going to India, it goes to a different department. I said, a writer? Do you have a problem with, because I'm a writer? What earthly problem do you have because I'm a writer? And I said, furthermore, I'm an older man, you know.
I actually had that problem too, and then I basically went in and resubmitted my application, and I put that I'm a researcher, and I got in.
A researcher, yeah.
So that's a tip, okay.
But anyway, but
Okay,
no,
we're going to run out of time.
People think that writers are dangerous. Indians think, there are plenty of writers in India.
Well, you tell the truth. In some societies, they put you in prison for that, right?
For being a writer, yeah.
Yeah.
Being a writer is dangerous.
Okay, we have 5 more minutes, so really
If
quick
you ask
one.
a question, I could repeat
Yeah.
the question. Oh, there you are.
Yeah.
Mrs. Theroux, now that you're finally traveling in your home country, how do you expect that to change you?
How has it changed me?
Expect it to change you, traveling in your home country.
How do I expect the country to change? No, just rephrase the question.
Now that you are finally traveling in your home country,
Yes.
how do you expect that to change you?
Oh, okay, that's a good question. Now that I'm traveling in my own country, I've been traveling in the South for 2 years. South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Arkansas, the deep South. How has it changed me? A lot, a lot. Travel makes you feel small. When you go away, don't you feel this? You leave Singapore, you think, Singapore, I know this street, Bras Basah Road, Orchard Road, Tanglin, Tanjong Rhu, I know the beach, everyone knows me, hello, how are you doing? You go to another country, you feel very small. Don't you find that? It's a very humbling experience. No one knows you. You feel small. And it's a reminder of how big the world is and how small you are. Traveling in my own country has humbled me a lot because I realized that the problems that we face in the poorer parts of America are the same problems that they face in Brazil, in South Africa, in the Congo, in India. That we're all one family on this planet, and many people have the same problems, no matter where you're born. You have the same issues. So how has it changed me is it's made me more compassionate, I suppose. It's made me understand the world a bit better. And it's made me wonder why. I was in Alabama, and I was in a town in Alabama, and I was staying at a bed and breakfast, and the woman, she was an older woman, 85, 86 years old, running this bed and breakfast. Very talkative, very friendly woman, and telling me about her family. And she said, and my son Jeremy is in Africa. I said, what's he doing in Africa? She said, he's helping people. I was helping him do what? He said, oh, he's in Zambia. I don't know what he's doing, helping them. Well, this was in Greensboro, Alabama, where the schools are still somewhat segregated. There's a high infant mortality rate. The hospitals are terrible. Business is terrible. And the poverty rate is very high. So maybe 25% of the people in that town live below the poverty line. Her son's in Zambia helping people. Now that, to me, that's really interesting. It's interesting to write about, it's interesting to talk to people, but that's the disconnect that you have. And so I thought, why would someone leave this very, very poor town to go to Africa to help people? Obviously, it's more fun. It's more fun.
Well, maybe he also wanted to find himself.
Maybe he
that
wanted to
search
find.
for
No,
identity.
he was.
Um,
Maybe he wanted to find out something about himself. That's true.
And
Or maybe God sent him there. I had the feeling that God had something to do with it. That he got.
Okay.
But God has. God has a hand in a lot of our decisions, and I think it had a hand in that decision. But still, it was. So what did I find out about myself was that, I was in this town thinking, this place needs help. And then I meat a person and said, he's in Zambia helping people. So the world is full of paradoxes, and I discovered really a lot. And I also discovered great beauty, that America has many, many big, empty, beautiful spaces, big where there's nothing. The Ozark, in the northern part of Arkansas. Arkansas is a state with 3 million people. 3 million people in the whole of, look at a map, see how big Arkansas is. There's only 3 million people there. Namibia in Africa, there's 2 million people in Namibia. Namibia is gigantic. It's gigantic. Look at it, there's only 2 million people there. How many people in Singapore?
4.5,
Yeah.
4.5 million.
Yeah.
So we have to take another question. Let's
Okay.
take another question.
Yes.
Yeah. If
Hello?
you speak up, yeah.
Yes.
Hi. First of all, Mr. Theroux, I would like to thank you not only for your talk, but for all the books. I think Sojourn put it very well, that sort of your books punctuate people's lives, and it's certainly been the case for me.
Thank you.
Maybe my premise is completely wrong, so please tell me if it is. I find a sort of common theme of your books, whether it's Kowloon Tong, Happy Hours of Oceania, Savidia's Shadow. A common theme is sort of pain and loss. And I was just wondering that if you write about this theme, are you able to sort of leave it on the page and sort of take it out of you, or does it very much remain still with you?
Okay, did you hear the question? I mean, it's a very interesting question, which is, he finds in my books, and he named a few, the subject of pain and loss. And the question is, in writing about it, do I leave it on the page? Have I eased my mind? I don't know about pain and loss. Probably I have written a lot about pain and loss. There's a lot of pain and loss in the world. But I sometimes think that my subject is a person in a place he or she doesn't belong, a misfit, odd man out, odd woman out. I sometimes think...
But Paul...
But I think life is like that,
yeah,
too.
but Paul, I think, you were very depressed when you wrote The Happy Hour of Oceania, and I traveled with that book through the South Pacific, and it really depressed me. So I know what you're saying, so I think the question is, like, after you wrote it, did you become happier? Or, and then you say about how you tell things as you see them, but there's a saying that we actually see things as how we are and not how they are, so our feelings color what we see.
No, definitely
Right.
that's true, yeah.
So that book, I mean,
I
so
thought-
do
well-
you become happy after you finish a book? When you're, so do you go from depressed to happy?
Well, I can answer the question simply by saying the act of creation, the act of making something, making a picture, writing an article, writing a book, the act of making a table, making a chair, making something makes you happy. It's a very fulfilling. It's impossible to do anything. Bake a cake, make a laksa, and give it to someone, write a poem. It's impossible for that to happen and not to feel a sense of accomplishment and liberation. I mean, I think that that's the joy of creation. That's why I was saying that there's a certain point in your life, when you're older, most of you are very young people, and some of you aren't very old at all, but there's a certain point in your life where you say, was it worth it? Did I make anything? What did I give the world? What did I do? Did I make anyone happy? Help my children, make my wife happy, make myself happy? What did I do? Was my life well spent? At some point, you get to that point and saying, what did I do with my life? Now, it's a profound question and might make some people depressed. So as Yuhun said, when I wrote The Happy Isles of Oceania, I'd split up with my wife.
Yeah.
And I went to find happiness. I wanted to see, I'd lived in England for 17 years. And I left, and I thought, I want to find my smile. I want to find sunshine. And I want to find a connection. I want to make a connection. So I did at the end. I mean, at the very end of the book.
It had a happy ending.
But yeah, it has happened. The trouble in that book, people would, I kept seeing people who were happy, and they depressed me because I thought, will I ever, I'd see two old people holding hands, and I thought, this is so wonderful, it makes me want to cry. I think these two people, old people walking down the road holding hands, and I thought, will I ever be old holding someone's hand? I mean, that's that's not depressing. That's the question that everyone asks. Will I ever meet Mr. Right, Miss Right? Will I ever grow old with them? And then people would say, are you married? And I'd say, well, it's a little complicated. Do you have any children? Yeah, but they're not here. Well, where's your wife? Well, I don't really have a wife. Well, what? And people ask me, so I put that all in the book of, where's your wife? Well, it's a long story, they'd say.
Okay, do we have time for
Hi.
the timekeeper? Okay, sorry.
Sorry, I got the
Yeah.
mic. I had to
Okay.
ask. I just have a quick question. I'm here.
Okay, all right.
C.S. Lewis talks about longing for a place you've never been to, and I was just wondering how that features in your writing or travel writing in general.
Well, I think that the essence of travel, the place that I want to go is the place I've never been, obviously. I mean, that they're fewer and fewer. Also, it's not just that. I mean, C.S. Lewis has a point there, but it's also, you want to go to a place where no one else has been. I mean, I think that in the heart of every true traveler is to find a place that no one else has been or no one else knows. It's feeling like Christopher Columbus, Robinson Crusoe, the conqueror, the person who just goes to a place and they discover it and they think, no one's ever been here. That's a wonderful feeling, actually. But you can get that feeling in a lot of places. I mean, in New York City, there are people who leave New York and go to Shanghai. They go to South Africa. I meet them all the time. And you say, have you ever been to, and I name a place in Long Island or Brooklyn, or, and they say, no, I've never been there. So it's possible that a person will leave home, go a great distance, but not know the people who live next door to him, who might be pretty interesting people, but they don't know. A lot of Americans travel. I meet lots and lots of people who travel in America, or leave America, been to China, been to Brazil, been to Japan, been to Singapore, but they've never been to Alabama. And so that to me is well, in the essence is you want to go to a place where no one's been. Let me ask you a question. Has anyone here been to Alabama? If you've been to Alabama, raise your hand. Mississippi?
It's quite a few.
Arkansas?
Ang Mo Kio.
Where?
Ang Mo Kio. I mean, there are people who live in Singapore who've never been to Ang Mo Kio, which is like the heartland. So.
Okay, well, that's true. What do you suppose here's a question. we got
Actually, I just want to ask you, like, is there a place that you've never been to that you really, really want to go? I mean, you say there are fewer and fewer.
there are places that I've never been that I don't want to go to. I mean,
Name them.
very cold places. I read books about Antarctica. I have no interest in going to Antarctica. Has
What was
anyone
the
been
last
to
book?
Antarctica? Yes, has been to Antarctica. So, too cold, too far, I don't know.
What was the last book you read?
The last book I read 2 books on the plane from Honolulu. On the way from Honolulu to Narita, I read a psychobiography of Henry David Thoreau. That's why I mentioned Thoreau in my lecture. From Narita to Singapore, I read a book called Norwood, Norwood, by Charles Portis. Charles Portis wrote True Grit, was a movie, a Coen Brothers movie, True Grit. He's a fantastically good and funny novelist. And now I'm reading a book at my hotel. It's a biography of the Empress Dowager Cixi, from 19th into about 1910.
Okay.
It's a big fat book. I'm running out of books, but I don't watch TV on planes.
And you don't read from on the Kindle, right? You say
I don't read a
there's no
Kindle.
Kindle
I
for
read
you.
books.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
But I was going to say, in closing, there's an airport in Arkansas. Some of you have been to Arkansas. About 8 people have been to Arkansas. How many have been to Arkansas?
Yeah, a few people.
Oh, a lot of people. 20
Can't believe.
people, 30 people.
Well-traveled people.
Well, Singaporeans are well-traveled, obviously. What's the name of the airport in Little Rock, Arkansas? The name of the airport in Little Rock, Arkansas. I heard someone say, Bill Clinton Airport. Close.
Chelsea.
No, see, you laughed when he said Hillary Clinton. It's called the Bill and Hillary Clinton Little Rock Airport. Who said Hillary?
Yeah, somebody said that at the end. Yeah.
You said Hillary. It's called the Bill and Hillary. Did you know that? Yeah, the Bill and Hillary. There's a bridge in New York City called the George Washington Bridge. It's called the George Washington Bridge. It's not called the George and Martha Washington Bridge.
Okay, so I have to wrap up, otherwise, I think we're running out of time. I have one final question for you, right? Legacy, you talked about asking, what have I done that matters, legacy. So epitaph, without being too depressing, what would your epitaph say?
I hope it would say something like, I produced 2 healthy, intelligent children who helped change things. The books are the books. A book goes its own way. You write a book, maybe something will happen. But my children matter a lot to me. And one was born in Uganda. One was born in Glen Eagles. My son Louis was born in Glen Eagles. He's on TV, he has a TV show. Has anyone seen his shows?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the fact that you've seen his shows, I'm his father. You've seen his shows. So I feel I feel as if, and my eldest son, Marcel, is a novelist. I feel that's my achievement. If I did anything, and I feel as if my children I'm very friendly with my children. They tease me. But we spend a lot of time together, and they have children, I have grandchildren. But I love being with my children. And I love writing. But rather than writing, I would rather take a road trip with my kids any day. Just talk to them and talk about the world.
Do they want to do it?
With me.
Yeah.
Now, yes. When they were making their lives, they're now in their 40s. So when they were busy in their 20s and 30s. But when they got married and had children, yeah, they wanted to spend time with me. So a legacy has nothing to do, in my view, with what I've written. I don't know whether books last. I mean, I feel as if I've written about the world that I've known. What will happen, I hope that people have been inspired by the book to travel or to see things differently, maybe to understand love, marriage, children, whatever it is, war, crisis, pain, politics. That would be nice if that helped people. But that's an imponderable. I don't know. And I'll tell you something else about Singapore and life in general. I was in Shanghai in 1986, and 1986 people were still running around, not well dressed. Deng Xiaoping was in power, and no one knew what was happening. But there were cranes in Shanghai, and some buildings. I was in the Jinjiang Hotel, and I was with an American diplomat who had been to China, had been in China for about 4 years. And I said, what's going to happen here? And we were looking at the cranes. I said, what's going to happen to China? And he said, I have no idea, because we didn't know that this was going to happen. We didn't, he pointed to, it was modest building, very modest building, but it was building. And he had known the Cultural Revolution and destruction. He said, we didn't know that this was going to happen, so we have no idea what's going to happen next. And I think that none of us can see the future, but one of the helpful things about telling the truth is the truth tends to be prophetic. If you describe things as they are, in the kernel of that is what they will become. We don't know what it'll be, but it tends to be somewhat prophetic. All you have to do is tell the truth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much.